Welcome, Pigeon News, Duiwe. It's very nice to have you back. It's been quite a while since I think you were last year in August 2021. But it's an honor to have you guys here again, and I hope that, as with the previous video that we made, there'll be quite a bit for our friends and colleagues in the sport to learn. We're now in 2023 already, and to give you a bit of background what's happened since you've been here last time, we partake in the Gauteng West Combine, which is a combine of the Pretoria Federation, which is the federation in Pretoria on the western side, and our own union WRRPA, which is situated on the West Rand in Gauteng. Since 2020, the Gauteng West Combine has been in existence, and we've been very fortunate that for the 3 years running, 2020, 2021 and 2022, we've been the Combine champions. What makes the Gauteng West Combine quite unique is that all the races on the program, from the short, middle and long distances, are all included to count for points and to establish the champion, in other words, over 36 races. So last year was quite a special year for us in that we were Combine champions again, but more importantly, we had a fantastic season on the long distances. Was very, very fortunate to win the Sandper gold and silver medal on the long distances. To give you a bit of background on the Sandper Medal Awards, it's very similar to what you'd find in Europe, in Holland and in Belgium specifically, where they have their National Ace Pigeon Awards at the end of the season. So Sandper uses a very similar method in establishing which pigeons win medals by using the coefficient method to work out a specific coefficient in terms of the bird's own performance. That is worked out by the position the bird attained in a specific race, which is then multiplied by 1,000 and divided by the amount of pigeons that it took part against. So in our case, our cock called Long Gold, his number is ZKPU 20 and his number is 200. He scored on the long distance category 4 times in the first 15 of the union, which is incredible if you think that on the long distance, all those races are further than 600 kilometers, somewhere between 600 and 750 kilometers. And I think that speaks to a lot to the way that the modern pigeon racer has evolved over the last couple of years, maybe even longer than a couple of years, maybe 20 years, where in the past, if I think back to when I was still racing with my late father, typically on the long distances you would have the birds flying one race and then at least resting 1 weekend, or in many cases 2 weekends, before it could race again. Since the advent of one-loft racing, I think the introduction of many new genetics from abroad has modernized South African pigeon racing to a very large extent, where we now have a breed of pigeon that can literally race every week, even on the long distances. So both our silver and gold medal winners of last year raced every race of the 19-week season. There was not 1 week that they did not go to a race. That sounds quite incredible if you think that over those last 6 weeks, the average distance is about 650 kilometers. So in other words, in those 6 weeks, they covered more than 4,000 kilometers. The genetics allows that, obviously, but also very importantly, the way that we train and that we race them. I've been asked the question many times, so what does a Sandper gold medal mean? And it's quite interesting to compare that with an ace pigeon maybe in a one-loft race, where even in the biggest one-loft races in the world at Pattaya and Victoria Falls, the intake is maybe 7,000 to 10,000 birds, and over a season of 5 hotspot races and a final, an ace pigeon is then crowned against those 10,000 pigeons. When it comes to national awards, Sandpo National Awards, those pigeons are competing against every pigeon in the country. And it's quite interesting to note that every year Sandpo issues somewhere between 450,000 and 500,000 rings, and of which a large proportion then take part in the races. Since 2018, our loft has now won 10 Sandpo medals on all the different classifications, in other words, short, middle and long distance. And we often get asked, how do we, what is the reason for that? How do we, what do we attribute our success to? And I think in the first place, it boils down to selection. The stricter you can be in selecting your team, your breeders, etc., the better your chances are to perform well. That sounds very simple. We basically use a couple of methods in selection. So the first method of selection we follow is to look at the previous year's results. That's the easiest, and I think anybody can go and have a look at these results and say, let's make a cut-off in terms of how strict we can be to have a team for next year. The next area of selection is obviously selecting your stock birds. Based on the performance of their babies, birds then get selected out if their percentage in terms of what they produce for us is not good enough. So many people are asking us the question, do you only keep your own family of birds, or do you still look around to improve your family? And I've got a very simple philosophy in that if you don't keep on looking for new improved genetics on a very, very regular basis, basically every year we look for new genetics to introduce to our stock, you're going to stagnate and move backwards very, very fast. A pedigree should not only have names. I always get concerned when I see terms like related to, brother of, nephew of, cousin to, closely related to, because it says very little about the bird itself. Usually that bird's performance itself is lacking. Rather look for a bird that's got its own performance, whether it be a racer or a breeder, and then also importantly, the father, the mother, and the 4 grandparents. If in those 7 pigeons on the pedigree, the first 7, the bird itself, its parents, and its grandparents, you don't find at least 4 champion birds, in other words, birds that are proven winners or proven breeders of winners, then rather look elsewhere. Another one of our, I think much talked about and maybe controversial methods of selection is taking young birds on their first training. For us, it's quite, I think, different in terms of our approach, and I don't think it's unique, and it's been done by many other champions, and that is not to toss the young birds on their first toss anything shorter than 80 kilometers, ideally further than 100 kilometers, depending on the weather of that day. In that way, the weak birds or birds that are genetically not up to standard will simply not return. And if you can carry that approach on for a couple of years, maybe 3, 4, 5 years, you'll find that by the 4th year that you're using that approach, you don't lose babies anymore, because the ones you lost, the parents also get moved out. Very good selection method. There are 2 very important things, however, that needs to be remembered in using this method. And that is that in the first place, those young birds must be 100% healthy, and they must be 100% fit. And they will show you themselves. If they're healthy and fit, a young bird loves flying. and they love flying for a long time. Before we take our birds on that first toss, they have to be able to fly 2 hours or longer at one go every day for at least 7 days. If they can do that, you can be for sure that you can take them further than 100 kilometers, and most of them, if not all, will return. To give you a bit of information and more detail about our 2 medal winners on the long distance 2023 gold and silver medal winners, the cock was bred out of a very famous cock in our loft, and now already in the country. I think he's become a legend. His name is Koning Kaas, and he himself was a fantastic racer, winning 9 races, first places himself, and another 2 we arrived with a loft mate. So in fact, you can call him an 11-time winner. His nest mate last year also won a race in the PSW Combine by some margin, and also produced a fantastic combine win for our friend Llewellyn Sharp in Port Elizabeth. So yes, the mother of those 2 pigeons, in other words, the mother to the gold medal winner last year, is a hen called the Maltino hen. She's also a very well-known bird amongst our friends, a direct daughter of the famous SK hen. And her children has proven themselves to be fantastic performers on the longer distances when the races are further than 600 kilometers, and the hours on the wing is probably more than 8.5, 9 hours. Then they are at their best. Our silver medal winner was a product of collaboration with one of our close friends in the Western Cape, Kenneth Edas. His cock, called Koning Kenny, is the father to Sylvida, which is our silver medal winner. And the mother is our very well-known hen Violetta. So those 2 pigeons are an absolute click pair. Every single baby that was raced out of that pair proved to be a winner or a champion racer. We raced 5 of them, we raced 3, and Kenneth raced 2. And every single one of those birds performed in the top 1% more than once. So yeah, this is Long Gold, the Sandpa Gold Medal Long Distance 2022. He's, for both years he was racing just a very, very reliable winner, especially on the races further than 600 kilometers. This is the Maltino hen, very famous hen, direct daughter of our SK hen. Herself, she was a fantastic racer. She won Maltino, which is one of the most difficult races in our union. It's from 600 kilometers. She won that race 2 years running. Both years the velocity was under 1200. I think the one year was 1050. And she's the mother to the Sandpa Gold Medal winner this year, but 2 of her other children during last year both won combine races. So she's a fantastic breeder, and her brother's son was racing at Africa Pro last year, and after I think 4 races he was the leader of the Blue Jacket. So they can perform anywhere under most circumstances. So this is Sylvida. She's the silver medal winner on the long distance category, category C, so that's for unions between 500 and 2,000 birds. A fantastic racer. Also, I think she's now a 5-time winner. She won as a baby in 2021, and last year I think she won 4 races for us. So this is the famous SK hen. She was bred by Bruno Pripko from Slovakia, entered into the 2013 $1 million race, and since she's been with us, we bred from her the first time in 2014. She's now bred 24 individual winners with 9 different cocks. Between those 24 birds, they've won a total of 68 races. She's the grandmother to the gold medal winner, and I think amongst the grandchildren, the last time we counted was already more than 50. A real true champion pigeon. Our breeding strategy is actually quite a simple one in terms of we look for birds that complement each other. So if we mate 2 pigeons together, we make sure that they have talent on the same discipline. Specifically on the long distances, we found that it's not the best idea to mate a long distance bird, so-called long distance, to a short distance bird. In fact, it's got nothing to do with distance at all. It's more the conditions on the day. Around the topic of what makes up a champion performance, like winning a Sandpa gold medal or being combine champion 3 years running, there's always the question of what component is more important, genetics or the trainer. In other words, how you feed them, how you train them, how you manage them. So our management principle is quite simple, in that we, in the off season, try not to medicate at all. So as far as possible, keep them healthy by our now well-known method of crop conditioning. So we usually start exercising our birds in preparation of the new season around about the first or second week in March. And typically, I must also say, we exercise our young birds and our old birds totally separately. I believe that old birds by nature is more lazy than the young birds, and they also fly a little bit slower around the loft. Their pace is different to a kit of young birds. Everybody watching this video that's seen their own little flock of young birds when they get weaned fly around the loft will notice that the pace and the speed at which they fly is much, much higher than the old birds. And I firmly believe that when you mix young birds and old birds in terms of exercising around the loft, you actually do the young birds a big disservice. Much better for them to exercise on their own, and typically healthy, good quality young bird loves flying, so you don't need to chase it. It will fly by its own for, in most instances, more than 2 hours without any problems. And if they can do that for 7 or 10 days in a row, then they are ready to take on 100 kilometers very easily without any fear of getting any lost. I also think it's very important to realize that if I talk about the modern way of pigeon racing, where birds race every week, that the numbers that every fancier keeps to race with should be in line with how many pigeons he can race per weekend. So, for instance, quite a few unions in our vicinity in Gauteng has a limit of 20 young birds and 20 old birds per weekend. So that gives you 40 birds to race. If you want to follow, let's call it the modern method, you have to try and race 40 birds per weekend. Now, if you have 80 or 100 birds in your race loft, how do you get those birds to be raced every week if you could only basket 40? And therefore, I think we're in a very unique and blessed situation where we live. We can partake in races in 2 unions, and we also have 2 sprint series. So we have 6 races every weekend where we can send around about 130 birds to the races. So our team is 135 or 140 birds to start with, but the majority of them, in fact more than 95% of them, will go to a race every week for the first 15, even maybe 16 weeks in a row. The 6 races that I talked about puts us under quite a bit of pressure in terms of the depth of quality in our loft. We try and compete full out in both unions we race in the WRRPA, part of the Gauteng West Combine, but also in the PSWU, which is our neighboring combine. The headquarters is in Rustenburg. So to be competitive in both sets of races every weekend is really not easy. And I think in South Africa there are very few lofts, I know of maybe 2 or 3, that can boast a similar record where you champion in the one combine or union and in the top 3 or 4 in the other one. That says a lot about the depth of quality in a loft. The fact that maybe I won't call it our reserve team, but let's call it our experimental team, is also competitive, says a lot about the quality. And obviously, we do not compete to come second or third or fourth. We compete to win, and hopefully this year the team will be strong enough that we can compete for both titles in both combines. It would be very interesting this year to see if the same holds true. The season has been pushed a little bit deeper into summer, which I think might suit the Europeans and the Northern Hemisphere countries a little bit better, because typically many of their races take place in their summer. What this has brought about is that I think everybody that takes part in one-loft races in South Africa and across the world have realized very quickly that you cannot send experimental pairs or experimental pigeons to a race like Africa Pro, or to even Dinukeng or Dias, or whether it's Pattaya or Vic Falls. You have to make sure that you send your best. And obviously that has a very big influence on your own racing team, because if you take 15 or 20 birds out of your best pairs, and you're not putting them in your racing team, but you're sending them to Africa Pro, or you're sending them to Dias, or you're sending them to Dinukeng, then that leaves a hole. And that obviously brings about challenges of broadening your base and improving your quality. So some of the other highlights last year in the one-loft race scene was we had a very nice win at Dias on their hospice race, bred from the same family as our gold medal winner. We also had 6th overall ace at Central Provincial Loft in Bloemfontein. We had first ace pigeon at Cape Town International with 2 weeks to go. Our little hen, also bred from Violetta, was heading the ace bird averages there. One of the birds bred from 2 birds that we bred got 8th in the final at Cape Town. We had a very, very good season at the one-loft races, and our strategy in terms of only mating the best to the best, I think, is starting to yield fruit there. We also, this year, we involved with 2 partners in different cities. We've got a partner in Bloemfontein and a partner in Port Elizabeth, and it's very exciting for us to spread our wings beyond our own loft a little bit in terms of flying under different conditions. It also helps us in terms of improving our genetic pool, because not all birds that perform well in Gauteng might perform well in the Eastern Cape, or vice versa. And it's very exciting for us to be involved at that level. I think our success, as I've said now many times, is based on modern ways of racing. Birds that can take racing every week. Birds that don't need to be pampered, don't need to be rested, and train themselves to get fit and perform every week. Okay, advice for the upcoming season. We're about 3 weeks out as we're recording this from the 2023 season starting. I think a lot of the success for the champions of 2023, the foundations has been laid many months ago already. To be successful at pigeon racing, you can't really say that there's a season. Champion pigeon racers live, eat, drink, sleep pigeon racing. It's a 365 and a quarter, and if we had another quarter day, it would be also in their job to focus on all the aspects of pigeon racing. At this stage, I think everybody's on the road. My advice during this time of year is to look after your young birds very, very carefully. If you notice anything amiss, in other words, losing their appetite, not eating, retaining food in their crop, vomiting, the best way to solve those problems is by simply giving them rest. I think in many cases, young bird disease breaks out during April and May. And my advice always is, when you notice the first signs of young bird disease, don't panic. Don't give them a lot of medicines. Just withdraw the food for 24 to 36 hours. Make sure they've got ample water. And when you start feeding them, feed them something that's very easily digestible, something like pellets or fine seeds, and don't feed a lot of food. Feed a little bit, and usually within 3 or 4 days they recover by themselves. In terms of the season starting, I think the most difficult 2 weeks in the season is the first 2 weeks, because in terms of picking your teams, you don't know the team and the strengths of certain of the young birds yet, and therefore it's very important for us to have a couple of mass liberations, at least 2 or 3, before the first race, so that the, let's call it, the future stars start showing, and you put them into the right teams when the season starts.